Tiny girl recognizes Russian whispers at restaurant and desperately warns mafia boss not to eat the... Port Harrow was a city of wet iron and old money, and tonight it was drowning. The rain didn't just fall, it hammered the East Coast docks, turning the cobblestone streets into black mirrors, inside marrow and slate. The air was thick with the smell of dry-aged beef, expensive perfume, and the kind of entitlement that never had to check a price tag. The restaurant was a bubble of warm light against the storm, packed with the city's elite. And then there was me. I was Nova Lynn, and I was nobody. I was the girl balancing 3 plates on one arm, my feet aching inside shoes held together by 2 layers of black electrical tape. The sole on the left one flapped, a quiet, embarrassing thwack against the polished mahogany floors with every step. I was supposed to be studying the morphology of dead languages, but my foster mother's hospital bills had killed my scholarship, and now I was a linguistics dropout serving $500 steaks to men who wouldn't look me in the eye. I was clearing plates from a foretop, nodding at a joke about yachts. When the sound cut through the restaurant's civilized hum, it came from the bar, from 2 men built like brick shithouses, nursing dark liquors. They were speaking Russian and not the clean, crisp Muscovite dialect from my textbooks. This was different. It was the clipped, hard-voweled speech of the North, the sound of ports freezing over. It was the accent of Arkhangelsk. I'd heard it once before, from an old sailor I'd translated for at a free clinic. It was a sound I never forgot. I paused by the service station, pretending to wipe a smudge from a wine glass. "Stolnomer deviat," one of them murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Table number 9. My eyes slid across the room. Table 9 was the best seat in the house, the curved booth in the alcove, shielded from the rabble. It was Cassian Draven's table. Even I knew who he was. You couldn't live in Port Harrow and not know. He was the whisper behind the Portline Syndicate, the man who owned the docks, the unions, and, according to rumor, half the city council. He wasn't loud. He was the opposite of loud. He sat there in a simple charcoal cashmere cardigan, looking almost academic, if not for the stillness in his shoulders. His eyes, the color of the harbor water before a storm, scanned the room with a practiced, predatory calm. They were eyes that assessed, cataloged, and dismissed everything, including me, earlier. The second man at the bar leaned in, his own Russian thicker. "Ubedis, kto chyornaya sol, namesta." Make sure the black salt is in place. A chill, entirely separate from the drafty service door, crawled up my spine. Black salt, a slang term, not culinary. I watched as Chef Dubois, oblivious in his white tower of a hat, finish the plating for table 9. It was the steak tartare, a house specialty. A prep cook, one I didn't recognize, hovered beside him. The cook's hand darted out, pinching something from a small, unlabeled steel tin. Not the flaky Malden salt from the finishing tray, but a fine, gray-black powder. He sprinkled it liberally over the raw meat. The men at the bar were watching the plate. "Vicep," the first one ordered, almost too low to hear. "Dump it, sprinkle it." "Srabotet," the second confirmed. "Srazu pozle tosta." It will work, right after the toast. My blood went cold. My brain, the one that loved syntax and etymology, was now screaming at me. After the toast, they were waiting for him to have a drink, to raise his glass. The alcohol would accelerate it. I stood frozen. My reality slammed into me. I owed 2 months' rent. My manager, Greg, was already watching me. His face tight with annoyance at my pause. Getting involved was suicide. These weren't drunk college kids. They were professionals. I was a 22-year-old girl with taped shoes and a stack of overdue bills. I should turn around. I should walk back to the kitchen, clock out, and run. The streets were violent, and I had survived this long by being invisible, by listening and never, ever speaking up. But they were going to kill him, right here. Cassian Draven raised his wine glass. The men at his table, all sharp suits and watchful eyes, did the same. My feet moved before my brain gave permission. I wasn't graceful. I stumbled, knocking into a chair, earning a sharp "hey" from a woman in pearls. I didn't care. I crossed the floor in 5 desperate strides and reached his table just as he set his glass down. He was picking up his fork. I didn't know what to do. I reached out and my fingers, trembling, brushed the sleeve of his expensive cardigan. It was like touching a live wire. The entire table went silent. His eyes snapped to my hand, then to my face. The sheer, concentrated power in his gaze almost made me vomit. I had no English words. My throat closed. So I used theirs. "Ne ešte," I whispered, and I forced the Arkhangelsk accent, hardening my vowels. "Oni polojili chyornuyu sol vi tartar. Tedvoi ubara. Don't eat. They put black salt in the tartar. Those 2 at the bar." It was the accent that did it. At the bar, 2 heads snapped up, their eyes wide with shock. Cassian Draven's fork stopped, the tines loaded with the poisoned meat, an inch from his mouth. His gaze didn't leave mine. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a terrifying Arctic alertness. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice soft. I swallowed, my eyes darting to the bar. The 2 men were already moving, pushing back their stools. "The salt," I translated, my voice shaky. "The men at the bar, they said it would lock the heart in 7 minutes. No one at the table moved. Then, the man to Cassian's left, a broad-shouldered man with a scar splitting his eyebrow, acted. He didn't question it. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the small silver pitcher of water from the table, unscrewed the top, and dipped his own pinky finger into the tartar, getting a smear of the meat and the dark salt. Before I could blink, he licked it clean. His eyes rolled back in his head almost instantly. He didn't make a sound. He just slumped forward, his body hitting the table with a crash of silverware and glass. He wasn't dead, but his body began to jerk in a violent, terrifying convulsion. The restaurant exploded. A woman screamed. Chairs scraped back. The kitchen's order bell started ringing, a frantic, shrill ding-ding-ding that punctuated the chaos. My manager, Greg, was already pushing through the crowd, his face pale. Cassian Draven didn't flinch. He made one sharp, downward gesture with his left hand, a man I hadn't even noticed, standing by the coat check, walked calmly to the restaurant's audio system and cut the jazz music. Silence, heavy and sudden, fell over the room, broken only by the screaming woman and the sound of the bodyguard choking on the floor. Cassian had control of the room in 10 seconds. "Get him up," Cassian ordered, his voice still quiet. His men were on their feet, hauling the convulsing bodyguard toward the kitchen exit. The 2 Russians from the bar were gone. "You!" Greg shrieked, finally reaching me. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "What did you do? What did you say to him? You're fired. Get out." He was pulling me, trying to drag me away, but I was frozen, watching Cassian. Cassian Draven stood up. He looked at Greg, and the manager's hand dropped from my arm as if he'd been burned. Cassian reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and dropped it on the table. It was enough to buy the whole restaurant. He looked at me. My entire body was shaking. "The girl," he said, his voice cutting through the panic, "comes with me." He nodded toward the kitchen, the same way his men had gone. "We need to finish that story, in Russian." He didn't wait for an answer. He put a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was not gentle, not kind, but proprietary. He steered me through the swinging doors of the kitchen, past the wide-eyed chefs and the steaming dish pit. We didn't stop. He pushed open the heavy steel service door, and the storm hit us. The alley was a wind tunnel of horizontal rain and the smell of dumpsters. It was so cold I gasped. Before I could react, he was shrugging off his charcoal cardigan and draping it over my shoulders. It was heavy with rainwater in an instant, but the residual warmth of his body was a shock. It swallowed me, smelling of wool and something metallic, like ozone and cold iron. A black SUV, massive and without license plates, slid to a stop at the mouth of the alley, its headlights cutting through the deluge. The door opened. I was shaking, my teeth chattering, This was it. I had traded being fired for being kidnapped. I had stepped out of my small, miserable life and into a grave. I looked up at him, ready to beg. Cassian Draven was watching me, his face illuminated by the harsh yellow security light. The rain plastered his dark hair to his skull. And in his eyes, I didn't see a monster. I didn't see a killer, though I knew he was one. I saw a man who understood, in a way I never had, the value of a single, life-saving second, and I saw, with a terrifying clarity, that he had just placed my life on the same level as his own. "Get in the car, Nova," he said. He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. I got in the car. The inside of the SUV was silent, a vacuum of black leather and soundproofed glass. The city's chaos became a muted, watercolor blur. I was still wearing his cardigan, the cashmere now heavy and damp, but it was a shield against the sterile chill of the vehicle. Cassian Draven sat across from me, not looking at me, but studying the rain-lashed window. The only light came from the dashboard, casting his face in sharp, angular shadows. "Start from the beginning," he said. His voice was not a request. The accent. I cleared my throat, my own voice sounding small. It was Arkhangelsk, northern port dialect. They clip their G's and the O sounds are harder. More open, it's not a common accent. I detailed every word I'd overheard, the table number, the timing, pozlatosta, after the toast, and the slang. "They kept saying Kiornea Sol," I said, the Russian words feeling heavy on my tongue. "It's not food, it's a compound. Potassium chloride, maybe, or something similar. Something industrial. In slang, it means a cardiac toxin, something that stops the heart and mimics a natural coronary." I also described the signal. The bartender, when the tartare was finished, had looked at the prep cook. He didn't nod. He made a subtle wiping motion with his fingers, like cleaning a slate, a signal for the final, untraceable addition. Cassian finally turned his gaze to me. It was heavy, an assessment. He pulled a sleek, encrypted phone from his jacket and typed a single, rapid message. He didn't speak. He waited. A minute later, the phone chimed softly. He read the reply, and his jaw tightened by a fraction. "Atlantic Integrity Commission," he said, more to himself than to me. "Banned substance list, number 47, black salt, chemical weapon precursor." He looked back up at me. "AIC is a serious ghost to have at a steak dinner. How do you know this?" Not just the language, the slang, the chemical implications. The adrenaline was fading, and the familiar, cold panic of my life was seeping back in. I was the girl with the taped shoes, sitting in a bulletproof car, talking about chemical weapons. "I told you," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I'm a linguistics student, or I was." "You didn't learn that dialect at Port Harrow University," he stated. "No." I had to tell the truth. "I learned it from YouTube, mostly, and from my neighbor, Mrs. Petrova. She's from Latvia but grew up near the White Sea. She used to pay me $5 to listen to her complain about the landlord in her native dialect." I took a breath. "I'm not a genius, Mr. Draven. I'm just broke. I need money, so I learn fast. I pick up freelance translation gigs, medical texts, legal fine print, sometimes conversations." He absorbed this. He saw me for exactly what I was, a scavenger. "You saved my life," he said. It was a flat statement of fact. "I pay my debts. Name your price for the full debriefing." The offer of cash felt like an insult. It felt like what the men at the bar were doing, just a different kind of transaction. "I don't want your money," I said, and the strength in my own voice surprised me. He raised an eyebrow. "Everyone wants my money." "I need a phone call," I said, the words rushing out. "A medical fine. It's at Harbor Mercy Hospital. My foster mother's account. They tacked on a penalty, a late fee, and it's too much. I can't cover it, and they won't schedule her next scan until it's paid." I looked him in the eye. "I want you to make it go away." For a moment, he just watched me. I had just asked one of the most powerful men in the city to fix a bureaucratic hospital bill. He didn't argue, and he didn't ask for the amount. He simply took out his phone again and made a call. "Harrow," he said into the receiver. There was no greeting. "Draven Maritime? I have an outstanding administrative fee at Harbor Mercy. Account holder is Lynn, foster dependent Nova. Yes, that one. I want it erased. Not paid. Erased. I'll wait." He held the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving my face. The silence stretched. I could hear my own heart beating. Less than a minute later, he said, "Good." He hung up. "It's done," he said. Just like that, a problem that had been a mountain on my chest for 6 months, a suffocating weight, was gone. I felt a wave of dizziness, a dangerous combination of profound gratitude and absolute terror. A man who could do that with one word was a man who could erase people just as easily. Before I could find a way to say thank you, another call came through, this one on the car's internal system. A gruff voice filled the cabin, kept low. "Boss, we have a problem. The 2 Russians are gone. Vanished, the alley cam was down, and the restaurant's main feed from the bar, it was on a 3-minute loop, starting from the moment you sat down. We're blind. The prep cook is also in the wind. It was an inside job. Clean." Cashin's expression didn't change. And Costa, on his way to our clinic, he's stable. The dose was significant. He's lucky he's built like a bull. Understood. Cassian ended the call. The SUV, which had been circling the block, now turned onto my street. Fog Row, the name was literal. A line of run-down brick tenements that looked like they were perpetually weeping in the damp harbor air. It was a stark, ugly contrast to the world we had just left. The vehicle slid to a silent stop in front of my building. This was it. He had what he wanted. He'd paid his debt. "You're not keeping me," I said, clutching the cardigan. It was a stupid thing to say, but I had to. "No," he said. He reached across the seat and offered me a small, flat black fob, no bigger than a quarter. "I'm not—" I stared at it. "Go upstairs, lock your door twice, and get some sleep," he said. I took the fob. My fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. "What is this?" "Insurance," he said. "It's a panic link. It doesn't call the police. It connects directly to my response team. You won't need it, but you'll have it." He didn't say goodbye, and he didn't say thank you. He just watched me as I got out, his cardigan still wrapped around me, a piece of his world I was taking into mine. I ran up the crumbling stairs and fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I locked the door once. I turned the deadbolt twice. My apartment was cold, the radiator hissing but providing no warmth. I stood in the middle of the tiny room. The sounds of the restaurant, the convulsing bodyguard, the rain, all spinning in my head. My phone buzzed on the counter, a number I didn't recognize, a text message. "Don't get involved with Draven. Next time they'll sprinkle the salt on your life." A jolt of pure ice went through me. I read the message again. And as I did, the single flickering bulb in my kitchen lamp sputtered. It buzzed, and it went out. The entire building plunged into darkness, a total, localized blackout. I stood in the pitch black, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard it, not from the hallway, from the fire escape. A metallic groan, the sound of a heavy boot scraping against the rusted metal platform just outside my kitchen window. My breath caught. I couldn't move. A shadow, darker than the blackness, blocked the faint gray light of the rainy city. It was a human silhouette, printed against the frosted glass of my window. Someone was right there. I fumbled for the fob. My fingers were numb, useless. I dropped it on the floor. Crying out, I dropped to my knees, scrambling, my hands slapping the cold linoleum. My fingers closed around the small, smooth piece of plastic. I pressed the button. I didn't even know if it was working. There was no sound, no light. I expected sirens. I expected a SWAT team. I expected shouting in the street. What I got was the sound of my own front door splintering. Not from a kick. The lock exploded inward, the deadbolt shearing clean through the frame. I screamed, scrambling backward. A beam of light so bright it was blinding, sliced through the darkness of my apartment. It wasn't coming from the window, it was coming from the doorway. He was standing there, Cassian Draven. He was still damp, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. The high-powered flashlight was in one hand, a phone in the other. He hadn't sent his team. He hadn't been more than a block away. He had come himself. His eyes found me, a pathetic, small heap on the kitchen floor. He swept the beam of the flashlight to the window, but the shadow was already gone, clattering down the fire escape. He lowered the light, training it on the floor between us. He walked in, his presence sucking all the air from the room. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He looked at the shattered lock, then at me. He came back for me? I realized, in that cold, terrifying darkness, that it wasn't for his honor. It wasn't because I was a witness. It was a principle, as cold and hard as the harbor steel. You don't let the person who saved you fall. The SUV didn't head back toward the lights of downtown. It plunged deep into the industrial heart of Port Harrow, a maze of shipping containers and silent cranes that looked like skeletal giants against the bruised sky. We drove past Dock 17B, a dark, isolated pier, and continued to the very end of the service road. We stopped before a corrugated steel fortress, a warehouse that looked like it had been dead for a decade. The faded paint on the side read Pharos Lighting and Nautical Supply. It was the perfect cover. Cassian led me through a reinforced steel door and into the darkness. It wasn't a warehouse. It was an armory, a command center, and a luxury apartment fused into one. The main space was vast and cold, dominated by a wall of computer monitors displaying security feeds from all over the city. And beyond them, the entire back wall, perhaps 30 feet high, was a single, massive sheet of armored glass, looking directly out onto the bay. The storm was visible now, a wall of black water and whitecaps churning. I clutched the heavy cardigan, which I was still wearing, closer to my chest. "This is a very elaborate way to kidnap someone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was terrified, but I refused to sound weak. Cassian walked to the glass, his back to me. He watched the harbor. "You are not a prisoner, Nova. You are a guest, a very complicated guest." He turned, his face half in the shadow, half in the green glow of the monitors. "You have a choice. You can walk out that door right now. My driver, the man who brought us here, will take you anywhere you want to go. He will park outside your building and he will not move until morning. You will be safe." He gestured with his chin toward a minimalist steel staircase in the corner. "Or, you can stay. One night, there is a safe room. It is more comfortable than my own. In the morning, the same driver will take you wherever you want to go." I looked at the steel door and then at the shattered lock of my apartment in my mind's eye. I thought of the shadow on the fire escape. Out there was the unknown, the men who wanted me silent. In here was Cassian Draven. I wasn't sure which was more dangerous, but only one of them had come back for me. "I'll stay," I said, "for one night." He nodded, as if he'd expected it. "I need one more thing before you rest, the audio." "And I need to make a call," I countered. He raised an eyebrow, then tossed me his encrypted phone. "No one will trace it." I dialed my roommate, Maya. She picked up on the second ring, her voice frantic. "Nova, oh my God, Greg from the restaurant called. He said you were fired, that you left with some guy." "Hey, Sarah," I said, cutting her off, using the code name we'd invented for bad dates. "I'm fine. Listen, it's a work thing. It got complicated. One of the clients had a private after-party. It's just a long night. I'm staying at the hotel downtown. I'm safe. I'll be back tomorrow. Okay." "Sarah, okay," Maya said, the panic receding, replaced by our shared, weary understanding. "Okay, be safe." I hung up and handed the phone back to Cassian. "Now, the audio." He led me to the bank of monitors. My team pulled the high-fidelity recording from the bar's security system, just before the feed was looped. He hit a key. The civilized hum of marrow and slate filled the room, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and then cutting through it, the low rumble of Russian, the two men. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds build a picture. "He's nervous," I said, pointing to the speaker. "The one from Arkhangelsk. His pitch is high. He's talking too fast. The other one, the one with the deeper voice, he's the one in charge." I listened, my mind sifting through the dialect. "Wait, play that back. The part where he mentions the cargo." Cassian isolated the audio, filtering out the background noise. The voice was slurred. "Nadok, semnadzet." "He's swallowing his consonants," I said. "He's not just saying the shipment. He's saying dock, doki. He's clipping the K at the end. It means dock." "We have over 80 active docks," Cassian said, his eyes fixed on the screen as he pulled up a schematic of the port. "He's slurring it into the next word," I continued, concentrating. "He doesn't say 7. He says Semnatsat B, 17B. I opened my eyes and looked at him. He's not just saying dock. He's saying dock 17B. Cassian's fingers flew across a keyboard. The port schematic zoomed in, highlighting the exact pier we had just passed. It was isolated, reserved for industrial chemical transfers. He turned and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation in his eyes. It was a sliver of raw respect. "Let's get some air," he said, his voice suddenly rough. He led me to a heavy steel door that I hadn't noticed. He opened it, and the storm tried to rip it from his hand. We stepped out onto a narrow steel balcony, cantilevered directly over the churning bay. The wind was a physical blow, stealing my breath. The rain felt like needles. Below us, the waves crashed against the pilings with the sound of cannon fire. The air was saturated with the smell of salt. Real salt, the kind that heals, not the kind that kills. I was shivering violently, the damp cardigan offering no protection against the raw Atlantic. Cassian saw it. He didn't speak. He just unwound the thick black wool scarf from his own neck. It looked impossibly soft. He stepped behind me. I froze. He wrapped the scarf around my neck, his movements deliberate, impersonal. But as he tucked the ends into the collar of the cardigan, his fingers, warm and calloused, brushed the skin of my throat. It was a jolt, a sudden, sharp, electric shock that had nothing to do with the storm. My heart, which had been racing with fear, now gave a different kind of frantic leap. He stepped to stand beside me at the railing, so close our arms were almost touching. We looked out at the chaos. His hand rested on the cold, wet steel, just inches from mine. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to put distance between us. Then, his hand moved. His knuckles deliberately brushed the back of my own. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't a caress. It was a question, a statement. "I am here." I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I just breathed, and the space between our hands felt hotter than a furnace. "My foster father was a captain," he said, his voice flat, barely audible over the wind. He was watching the water, not me. "He ran a freighter out of this port for 30 years. One night, a storm like this. He was lost. The company, the shipping line, they said it was negligence. They voided his insurance, his wife, his kids. They got nothing." He paused, and the muscle in his jaw worked. "I was 16. I found out later it wasn't the storm. It was the boat. The manifests were forged. The hull was rusted through. The owners cut corners to save a few $1,000s. He finally turned his head. "I came to the docks to find out why. I never left." I understood that kind of anger, the kind that builds you a new skeleton. "I grew up in the shelters," I said, my voice just as quiet. "Fog Row was the last stop. You learn to survive by listening. You learn the difference between angry footsteps and drunk footsteps. You learn which floorboards creak. You learn that what people don't say is the only thing that matters." I looked at him. "Tonight, I heard what they weren't saying. I heard that they thought you were just like them." His phone buzzed, a high-priority vibration we both felt through the railing. He pulled it out, his face illuminated by the screen. His expression hardened. "The bartender at Marrow and Slate," he said. He had a handler, a man with known ties to the Obsidian Cartel. The Obsidian Cartel, I said, shaking my head. That doesn't fit. They're smugglers. Yes, but they move guns and cash, mostly Central American routes. The men at the bar were Russian. The accent was precise. But they were there. They were the muscle, I insisted, the pieces clicking in my head, the delivery. They weren't the suppliers, and they weren't the ones who gave the order. I replayed the audio in my mind. They mentioned a name, an approval. They said the order came from Belia. A name? Yes, I said, Belea. The ya ending, it's feminine. A woman, she's the broker. The Russians work for her. The cartel must be the buyers. This woman, Belea, is the one connecting them. As I said her name, the sky tore open. A brilliant, jagged fork of lightning struck a buoy far out in the bay, illuminating the entire harbor in a ghastly, momentary flash. It was followed by a crack of thunder so loud it vibrated in my chest. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. Cashin's stillness was gone. It was pure, focused energy. They'll move it now, he said, his voice a low growl. In this, no one is watching the water. They're using my port to move that poison. He was already moving, turning back to the door. He stopped in the threshold and looked back at me. I was still on the balcony, framed by the raging storm, his scarf a warm weight around my neck. The tension, the shared histories, the brush of his hand, the imminent danger, it all converged into one heavy, unspoken moment. Thank you, he said. The words sounded foreign on his tongue, as if he rarely used them. He knew they weren't enough. He took one step back toward me, closing the distance. His voice dropped, and it was a promise meant only for me, a vow made against the storm. From now on, he said, anyone who whispers about you will have to whisper my name first. The glass wall of Pharos was a sheet of running black ink, the storm trying to break in. Down on the dock, visibility was near zero. Cassian stood beside me, his attention split between the digital schematic of Dock 17B and the encrypted feed from his men, who were shadows moving through the deluge. My job was to listen. I wore a headset patched directly into the Russians' open frequency for several minutes. It was only the shriek of the wind and the crackle of interference. Team 1 in position, Cashin murmured, his voice low. They have eyes on the tugboat, the Kestrel. My feed sparked to life, a man's voice, thick with the Arkhangelsk accent, cutting through the static. On Opozdal Prover Chulan. He's late. Check the pantry. They're moving. I translated, my voice flat, professional. They're waiting for the exchange. He said to check the Chulan. The pantry, Cashin asked, not looking at me. It's slang, I said, my mind racing, connecting the linguistic dot. A pantry is a small, dry, hidden place. It's not a room. It's a cache, a smuggler's hide. I pointed to the schematic of the tugboat on his screen. It has to be a hidden compartment, under the deck. As if on cue, the heat signature cameras Cassian had trained on the dock showed two figures emerging from the Kestrel. They were carrying a heavy, dark duffel bag. They walked to the end of the pier, where a sleek, dark sedan was waiting, its engine idling. This was a new player. A man stepped out of the car. He wore an expensive suit, somehow still pristine, protected by a massive umbrella. He didn't look like a dock worker. He looked like law enforcement or a lawyer. My audio feed picked up the exchange, the wind tearing at the words. Eto visya chiornaya sol. The Russian said, this is all the black salt. The man in the suit nodded. He didn't speak. He opened the trunk of his car. The Russians handed him the duffel bag. In exchange, the suit motioned to his own passenger, who emerged carrying a single, hardened aluminum case. It was stenciled with one word, Eclipse. Eclipse, I whispered. The precursor, Cassian said, his voice grim. The chemical that makes the salt work, undiluted. The man in the suit opened the case, examined the contents, and snapped it shut. He was the buyer. I know him, Cassian said, his voice suddenly dropping to a freezing temperature. He tapped a key, and the grainy video feed zoomed, running the man's face through a database. A name flashed on the screen. Marcus Thorne, Director of Investigations, Atlantic Integrity Commission. He's the mole, I breathed. He's not a mole, Cashin corrected. He's the ringleader. He's using AIC cover to move his own poison, using the Russians as muscle and the Obsidian cartel as his buyers. My team is moving in. No, I said, grabbing his arm. The contact was electric, and he froze, looking at my hand on his sleeve. If your men engage, Thorne will escape. He'll use his AIC credentials to vanish, and he'll burn the entire evidence chain. You'll get the runners, but you won't get him. Cassian stared at me, his eyes analyzing, assessing. He knew I was right. Thorne was getting back in his car. The Russians were heading back to the Kestrel. They were splitting up. We were losing them. We have to stop them from leaving, I said, the plan forming out of pure desperation. We have to separate them from their escape routes, from the boat, and from that car. How? Patch me through, I said. Put my voice on their frequency. He looked at me as if I were insane. They'll trace the signal. They'll be too confused to trace it, I argued, my heart hammering. They're already on edge. The storm is our cover. As if the sky were listening. A new sound joined the storm, a violent, rhythmic hammering. The rain had turned to hail. Ice, the size of marbles, began to slam against the metal roofs and the glass wall of Pharos. The Russian comms exploded in curses. Ukodim seichas. We're leaving now. Do it, Cassian, I urged. They're panicked. They'll follow a strong command. I'll send them to the crane yard, Dock 19. I'll tell them it's an emergency extraction point. He didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the console. A small red light blinked on my panel. I was live. I took one deep breath, summoning the accent, the arrogance, the gravelly authority of the Russian leader I'd heard earlier. Vнимание, I barked. Attention. Smena plana. Agenti AMK na prichale. Change of plan, AIC agents on the pier. I let the hail punctuate the silence. Perimestite eclipse na kranovuyu ploshchadku. Deviat natsat. Nemedleno. My vestra tam. Move eclipse to the crane yard. 19. Immediately. We meet there. The other end was silent. Then, one word. Poniel. Understood. On the video feed, the scene devolved into chaos. The two Russians, who'd been about to board the Kestrel, grabbed the eclipse case from their own boat. They looked at Thorne's car, then at the crane yard 2 docks over. Believing their escape was compromised, they abandoned the boat. They started running, on foot, toward Dock 19. Thorne, seeing his muscle flee, slammed his car into gear, his tires screeching on the wet pavement. He tried to follow them, but the hail was too thick. They had missed their window. I pulled the headset off, my entire body shaking, drenched in sweat. It worked! Yes, Cassian said, already on his own comms, redirecting his men to intercept the Russians at the yard. But stay on the line. I put the headset back on. The main Russian's voice was back, but now it was pure fury. Kado dalitot prikaz. Who gave that order? A confused mumble. Eto bil neya. That was not me. Golos, the leader said, a cold dread in his tone. On bil slishkom chistim, slishkom idealnim, eto perivodchik. The voice. It was too clean, too perfect. It's the translator. A new sound entered my feed, a fast, rhythmic electronic ping. Cashin's head snapped up. His eyes met mine. They're tracing the signal, he said, his voice flat. They know where we are, I whispered. They know where the signal was, he corrected. He grabbed my arm, pulling me from the chair. We move. Now. He didn't run for the steel door. He ran to the opposite wall, to a massive, archaic breaker box labeled Pharos, Emergency Main. By the desk, the floor hatch, he yelled over the storm. I scrambled, my fingers finding the recessed steel ring in the floor. I pulled, revealing a black square opening. The smell of cold seawater and rust hit my face. Cassian put his entire body into the main breaker. With a groan of tortured metal, He wrenched the giant lever down. The world vanished. The monitors, the lights, the hum of the servers. Everything died. The only sound was the muffled roar of the hail on the roof and the wind screaming outside the glass. We were in absolute, terrifying darkness. "Go," his voice commanded from the black. I swung my legs into the hole. My shoes hit icy, ankle-deep water. It was a utility tunnel, narrow and low. I staggered, and then he was in the hole behind me, pulling the hatch closed, sealing us in. It was the blackest dark I have ever known. "I can't see," I gasped, my voice sounding small and thin. "Don't. Listen." His voice was right by my ear, a warm presence in the freezing dark. Hand on my shoulder. "We're moving." I reached out, my trembling fingers finding the damp wool of his jacket. He was a solid mass in the void. We waded forward, crouching low to avoid the pipes overhead. The water was surging, pushed in by the storm tide. It was deafening, the sound of the waves crashing against the pilings outside, echoing and amplifying until it sounded like the walls were collapsing. I could hear him breathing, a steady, controlled exertion. I could feel the heat rolling off him. We were so close. My cheek was almost pressed to his back. He stopped, so suddenly I collided with him. "What is it?" I whispered, my lips brushing the shell of his ear. "It's sealed." He breathed back. His breath was hot on my face. "The storm surge. The main duct is flooded." I could feel the panic rising, a cold pressure in my chest. No, wait." I pressed forward, past him, my hands hitting the cold, final concrete wall. He was right, it was a dead end. I listened, forcing my mind past the panic, past the roar of the water. I heard something else, a hollow, rhythmic clicking. "There," I whispered, my mouth close to his. "Hear it, the cable duct. It's the old telegraph line. It runs parallel, but it's higher. It should be watertight." I felt his head turn toward me in the darkness. He didn't ask if I was sure. His hand found mine, his grip bruising, pulling me back. "Lead." I moved past him again, our bodies sliding against each other in the narrow, wet space. I found the sidewall, my fingers tracing the rough concrete until they hit a cold, rubberized square, a maintenance junction. "Here." I heard a sharp click as he produced a tool. A metallic scrape, a grunt of effort, and the heavy, sucking sound of a pressurized seal breaking. A rush of dry, musty air hit my face. "In," he ordered. It was a crawl space, barely 2 feet high. He pushed me forward and we crawled on hands and knees, the hard drive containing the complete transaction logs from the Kestrel which his team had retrieved from the abandoned boat and relayed to him just before the blackout safe in his inner pocket. We crawled for what felt like miles. Finally, he stopped. "Wait." He pushed open a heavy panel above us and hoisted himself out. He reached back for me. His grip was like steel. He lifted me effortlessly from the duct and into a dry, concrete room. It was silent. A chemical red light flared to life. He had ignited a flare. We were in a small, windowless bunker, filled with old electrical equipment, the lighthouse spur maintenance vault. We were safe. He stood in the crimson light, water streaming from his hair and clothes. He looked at the hard drive in his hand, then at me. His chest was rising and falling, his breathing harsh. He hadn't questioned my accent. He hadn't questioned my plan. And in the dark, he hadn't questioned my directions. He had just followed. He had trusted me, and we were alive. The maintenance vault was a concrete tomb, but it was dry. We had to wait for Cassian's team to give an all clear. When the signal finally came, we moved through an internal hatch, emerging back into the pitch black, silent cavern of the Pharos Command Center. The storm had done its work. The entire city was dark. The power grid was down. The only light came from the outside, the sky a venomous, churning green, lit by intermittent flashes of lightning. The massive glass wall was a window into the apocalypse, the bay invisible, the rain and hail a solid, roaring sheet of white noise. We were soaked to the skin. The freezing water from the harbor, mixed with the sweat of our escape, had chilled me to the bone. My teeth were chattering so violently I couldn't speak, my jaw aching. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a deep, seismic shock. Cassian moved through the darkness with a predator's easy familiarity. He went to a low cabinet built into the pine-paneled wall, a section of the room I hadn't noticed, one clearly meant for living, not fighting. He pulled out 2 thick, heavy wool blankets. He wrapped one around my shoulders. It was heavy, and I was shaking too hard to hold it. My hands were blue. "The main generator is flooded," he said, his voice clipped. "We need heat now." He didn't bother with the blankets. He guided me to a small, cast-iron gas heater set into the wall. He knelt, clicking the pilot light. A circle of low, blue-orange flames sputtered to life, casting a small, warm, flickering glow in the immense darkness. It was the only warmth in the room. He sat on the floor, his back against the pine wall, and pulled me down beside him. He took the blanket from my shoulders and rewrapped it, this time around both of us, pulling me tight against his side. "Body heat," he said. It was a practical, logical statement, but I was rigid. I was trapped under a blanket, pressed against the solid, warm body of Cassian Draven, the man who had promised that people would whisper his name before mine. I couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was the restaurant, the bodyguard convulsing, the shadow on my window, the chase through the dock. "It's just shock," he said, his voice a low rumble beside my ear. He shifted, his arm still around me. With his free hand, he reached for a small kit, a gas burner, a tin, a bottle of water. In the dark, with the storm howling outside, he made hot cocoa. He held the steaming metal mug out, but my hands were useless, shaking violently. "Here," his voice was soft. He didn't let me take the mug. He brought it to my lips, his other hand coming up to cup the back of my head, holding me steady. "Drink." It was an order. I obeyed. The chocolate was scalding hot, bittersweet, and I felt the warmth hit my stomach like a furnace. The first real heat I'd felt in hours. He gave me a second sip, and a third. Then he set the mug down. He looked at me. My teeth were still chattering. He sighed, a low, frustrated sound. He unwrapped the blanket and moved, shifting to sit directly in front of me, our knees almost touching. He took both of my freezing hands in his. His hands were large, rough, and radiated a dry, steady heat that was shocking. He chafed my hands, his movements strong and sure, forcing the blood back into my fingers. He held them, enclosing them completely, his thumbs rubbing slow circles on my palms. He just held me there, in the small circle of firelight, bringing me back to life with the heat of his hands. He watched my face, his eyes dark, the flames reflecting in them. "I was afraid," he said, his voice so low it was almost lost in the rain. I looked at him, confused. "In the restaurant, when you touched my arm." He held my gaze. "I wasn't afraid of the poison. I've had men try to kill me since I was 15. I was afraid of losing you." My breath caught in my throat. "I didn't know your name," he continued, his voice raw with an honesty that felt more dangerous than his violence. "I didn't know why you did it, but I knew that if they silenced you before I found out, it would be a loss. I've never felt that before." He had seen me as a person, not an asset, not a tool, not a witness, a life. My shaking had slowed. I was looking at his mouth. He was looking at mine. The air between us was suddenly thick, heavy, and hot. I didn't think. I leaned forward, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. It was all the invitation he needed. He closed the distance, his lips meeting mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of profound relief. It was hesitant at first. Cold lips and warm breath, tasting of chocolate and the storm. It was a question, an acknowledgement that we were both still breathing. I exhaled, my lips softening under his. That was my answer. The kiss deepened. He released my hands, and one of his came up to cup my face, his rough palm against my cheek, his thumb stroking the skin just below my eye. It was an anchor. It was the first gentle touch I had felt in years. My own hands, now warm, rose, and I pressed my palms flat against his chest. I felt his heart. It was not calm. It was a powerful, rapid, heavy beat, a drum pounding against my hands, matching my own. He broke the kiss slowly, resting his forehead against mine. We were breathing the same air. Our eyes closed. I didn't want him to let go. I felt a sudden, desperate need to be closer, to be protected. I moved first. I slid my arms around his waist, pressing my face into the damp wool of his sweater. And I held on. He went still for a beat, surprised by the contact. Then his arms came around me, pulling me in so tight I couldn't breathe. But I didn't care. He enveloped me. One hand splayed across my back, holding me to him, the other moving to the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my wet hair. He held me. He just held me. I was pressed against his strength, my ear against his chest, listening to the wild drumming of his heart. Outside, the world was ending, the wind screaming, the rain lashing the glass. But in here, there was only the sound of his breathing and the steady beat of his heart under my ear. He rubbed my back, slow, soothing circles. "You're safe, Nova," he whispered into my hair. "I have you. You're safe." We stayed like that, huddled in the blanket, until the shaking finally, completely, stopped. "This is, I started, my voice muffled. "This is new." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark and serious in the firelight. "This is a boundary. Nova, this is your choice. What just happened? What happens next? It's your choice, not mine. Do you understand?" He was talking about respect, about consent. The man who ruled the port was giving me all the power. I nodded, a lump in my throat. "I'm so tired," I whispered, the admission hitting me like a physical blow. "I know." His voice was gentle. He shifted, settling his back against the wall again, and pulled me down, this time arranging me against his side, my head fitting perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. He draped the heavy wool blanket over me, tucking it under my chin, cocooning me in warmth. I let my eyes close. I was warm. I was safe. The sound of his steady breathing and the low roar of the storm was a strange, hypnotic lullaby. I felt a light pressure, a breath of warmth on my forehead. He had kissed me, so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. My hand, resting on his leg, went slack. He shifted, sliding his index finger into my open palm. My fingers closed around it, gripping it like an anchor. Outside, the harbor sirens wailed and lightning split the sky. Inside, 2 heartbeats slowed, finding a rhythm against the darkness. I was drifting, pulled into the first safe sleep of my life, when a low vibration hummed through his chest. I felt him tense. I opened my eyes. He didn't move his arm from around me, but with his free hand, he pulled his encrypted phone from his jacket pocket. It had its own power source. He read the screen. The orange glow of the fire lit the sudden, sharp calculation in his eyes. The peace was shattered. "What is it?" I whispered. He looked at me, his gaze already a million miles away, planning, moving pieces on a board only he could see. "It's a name," he said, "Belaya Mirov." My breath caught. "The woman from the audio." "She's just been confirmed," he said, his voice flat and cold, "as the guest of honor at the Haven Light Charity Auction, tomorrow night." We looked at each other. The warmth of his hand, the promise of his kiss, was still on my skin. But the storm inside had just begun. Morning was coming, and with it, a new kind of war. The Haven Light Hotel ballroom was an assault of crystal and noise. This was where Port Harrow's elite came to buy forgiveness. They called it philanthropy, but it was just laundering, trading dirty money for clean reputations, $5,000 a plate. I stood beside Cassian, but he was not Cassian. Tonight, he was Mr. Kratos, a reclusive shipping investor from Athens, a man of few words and an intimidating bank account. I was not Nova Lynn, the girl with taped shoes. I was his translator, a severe woman in a midnight blue sheath dress that felt more like armor than clothing. It had been delivered to Pharos an hour ago, a silent order, the intimacy of the safe house. The shared blanket and the heat of his hand felt a lifetime away. This was his world, and I was in camouflage. "The air in here is worth more than my old apartment," I murmured to him, pretending to adjust my earpiece. "It's just as toxic," he replied, his eyes scanning, assessing, owning. We saw her, Belaya Mirov. She was the sun, and the rest of the room orbited her. She was tall, encased in crimson silk, laughing a laugh that never reached her cold, pale eyes. She was a performance, and on her wrist, glinting under the chandeliers, was a thick, modern silver bracelet. I recognized the symbol etched into the clasp from the case at the docks. Eclipse. I watched her mouth. She worked the room, her English flawless, laced with a faint, charming European ambiguity. But as she turned to an assistant, annoyed, a sharp Russian phrase slipped out, "Prover ego. Check him." I saw Cashin's gaze flicker to me. He hadn't heard the words, but he had seen me react. Then, the evening's host took the stage. Marcus Thorne, the AIC mole, the ringleader, was the picture of civic duty. He spoke eloquently about transparent supply chains and community stewardship. I felt my stomach turn. He was the man Cassian had seen at the dock. "Mr. Thorne is a generous donor," Cashin observed, his voice flat. "He's a good actor," I whispered back. Cashin's thumb brushed the screen of his phone, a single, silent message. I knew what he was doing. He was signaling his legal team, the legitimate side of Draven Maritime. The trap wasn't for tonight, it was for tomorrow. A legal challenge, a quarantine on one of Thorne's legitimate shipping permits, a bureaucratic knife, slid between the ribs. The auction began, we drifted, and then Belaya was in front of us. She had been waiting. "Mr. Kratos," she said, her smile brilliant and false. "We were not expecting you to grace us with your presence. You rarely leave the Aegean." Cassian nodded, the perfect image of a silent investor. He looked to me. "Mr. Kratos prefers to observe his investments personally." I translated, my voice smooth and detached. "He has concerns about the volatility of Port Harrow's industrial shipping." "His concerns are well-founded," Belaya said, "but misplaced." This was the moment, the bait. I smiled, as if I were a little confused. "He's particularly concerned," I said, my voice projecting just enough, "about the recent congestion near Dock 51 North. It has delayed his projections." Belaya's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Dock 51. North was on the opposite side of the city. It was meaningless. It was a signal that we knew something. She thought we were partners, rivals. She thought Kratos was here to cut in on her territory. "Your client," she said, her voice dropping, a predator's purr, "worries about the wrong docks. He should know the channel will be completely clear before dawn. All cargo will be moving." She had confirmed it. The shipment was moving tonight. She dismissed us with a nod and turned away. Cassian's hand rested on the small of my back. A silent, "Well done." The auction droned on. Abstract paintings that looked like paint spills sold for $200,000. Then the centerpiece came up, a hideous, massive canvas of a dying swan. The auctioneer started the bidding, 50,000. 100,000, Belaya's voice called out. 150, Marcus Thorne countered from across the room. They were bidding against each other. It wasn't an auction. It was a payment. They were publicly transferring the money for the Eclipse chemicals, laundered through the Haven Lights Art Fund. 300,000, Belaya said, her voice bored. Thorne smiled. 400. They were going to hit 500,000. Mr. Kratos, I whispered, that's the transaction. I know, he said. Going once, the auctioneer cried. Going twice. $1 million, Cassian said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the entire ballroom. The room went dead silent. Belaya Mirov and Marcus Thorne both turned, their faces masks of pure, controlled fury. Cassian had just intercepted their payment. The auctioneer stammered, I I have 1,000,000. Do I hear 1,000,005? Silence. Cassian had not just offered to pay, he had stated the price. It was over. Sold, the auctioneer slammed the gavel. To Mr. Kratos. By buying the painting, he had seized the paper trail. He owned the transaction. He could trace the seller, the bank, the originating account. He had just stuck a crowbar in their pristine machine. As the room erupted in shocked whispers, I saw Belea's bodyguard, a mountain with a Slavic face, staring at me. He hadn't been on the docks, but he must have heard the comms. He was looking at my mouth, at my face, and a slow, terrible recognition dawned in his eyes. He leaned in and whispered urgently to Belea, "Eto ona, Golos." It's her, the voice. Belea's polite mask evaporated. She saw me, really saw me. The translator, the girl from the dock comms, the girl from the restaurant. She and her team turned, not to congratulate Cassian, but to leave. They were moving fast, toward a private exit. "Cassian," I said, my voice tight. "They know me." He was already moving. "They're running. Stall her." Auction staff were swarming him, fawning, holding out digital signature pads. He was trapped. "Go," he ordered. "I'll be right behind you." I followed Belea. She wasn't going to the main door. She was cutting through a side gallery, dark and empty, lined with statues. Her bodyguards were fanned out. "Belea," I called out. She stopped. She turned, her crimson dress looking like spilled blood in the shadows. The bodyguard who recognized me moved to stand beside her. "The girl," Belea said in Russian, her voice dripping with contempt. "The little mouse from the storm. You have a loud voice for someone so small." "The salt you sell," I said, my English cold and steady. "It leaves a stain. You can't wash it out, no matter how much art you buy." "You should have stayed in your hole, little mouse," she snarled. She gave a short, sharp nod to the bodyguard. "Uberi Ayo." "Get rid of her." The man moved. He reached inside his jacket. A sound pierced the air. Not a gunshot, a shriek, the fire alarm. The building plunged into emergency mode. Strobes flashed, turning the hallway into a nightmare of red, pulsing light. Evacuation orders blared over the speakers. The high society crowd began to panic, a wave of silk and tuxedos surging toward the exits. The bodyguard was distracted, his head snapping toward the alarm. In that second of red light, Cassian was there. He hadn't come from the hallway. He'd come from a service door. He didn't bother with the bodyguard. He moved directly, violently, on Belea. It wasn't a fight, it was a collision. He slammed her back against the wall, his body shielding mine. His left hand seized her wrist, the one with the bracelet. His thumb found the clasp. It was not a normal clasp. It was a pressure lock. There was a sharp click. The bracelet came free. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a key, a drive. Belea screamed, a raw, ugly sound. The bodyguard lunged, his hand finally clearing his jacket. Cassian didn't look. He grabbed my hand. "Run!" He pulled me back through the service door, into the roaring chaos of the backstage. We shoved past terrified catering staff, past racks of champagne glasses that crashed to the floor. We were a whirlwind. We burst through a set of double doors, and the sound of the city hit us. We were on the skywalk, a high glass tube that connected the hotel to the parking garage, suspended 50 feet above the street. We stopped, breathing hard, the red emergency lights of the hotel flashing behind us. Below, the city was spread out, the storm gone, the streets shining like wet obsidian. Cassian held my hand in a grip of steel. In his other, he held the silver bracelet. He looked at me, his chest rising and falling. He had the key. He had the paper trail. We had just declared war, and we were standing above the entire sleeping city, in plain, open sight. The ride back to Pharos was quiet, the adrenaline of the auction fading into a heavy, shared exhaustion. The city lights smeared across the windows of the SUV, painting streaks of neon and shadow over Cassian's face. He was staring at the silver bracelet in his hand, his thumb tracing the eclipse symbol. "My brother, Leo," he he said, his voice quiet, directed at the window. He was 14. I stayed silent. This was not a conversation. It was a confession. He wasn't like me. He was soft, liked books. He got in with the wrong crowd, trying to prove he was tough. He bought something, street-level junk. It was cut. Cassian's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping. It was cut with an industrial solvent, a precursor chemical, almost identical to the compounds in that black salt. It wasn't an overdose. It was a poisoning. It took him 3 days to die. He closed his hand around the bracelet, his knuckles white. "That's why," he said, the words barely audible. "That's why I took the port. I control what comes in. No solvents, no precursors, no salt, not on my water. I'll bleed the man who tries." He had drawn his line in the sand, a moral code written in his brother's blood. I looked down at my own hands, folded in my lap. The dress felt foreign, a costume. I used to be afraid of my own voice, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. He turned his head, his gaze sharp, pulling me from the memory. Before my scholarship, when I was desperate, I took any translation gig I could find. Online, no questions asked. I thought I was just translating business letters, shipping manifests. My throat tightened. It was a man. He said he was helping families. Refugees, he needed me to make calls, to read scripts to them, to convince them to get on a specific truck, to trust a specific driver. I looked at him, forcing myself to meet his eyes. I wasn't translating. I was luring. They were being trafficked. I heard it on the news 3 months later. The refugees, the driver, my voice, my words. I was the reason they trusted him. Cassian said nothing. He just watched me, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't know," I whispered, "but it doesn't matter. I never took another no-questions job. I hid. I went to serve steaks. I was so afraid of what my words could do, I stopped using them. Until the restaurant," he finished for me. "Until the restaurant," I agreed. We were quiet. The moral ambiguity hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. He was a criminal who protected his city from poison. I was a victim who had become an unwilling accomplice. We were both stained. "You use your strength to stop what you hate," I said, finally understanding him. "You run the underworld, but you use the rules of that world to keep that from happening." "And you," he countered, "you use the one thing you were afraid of to save a life, mine." We arrived at Pharos. The command center was quiet, the backup generators humming. Cassian handed the bracelet to a tech, a man with haunted eyes who immediately plugged it into a decryption server. Cassian poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. He stood beside me, not at the glass wall, but facing the schematic of the port, now lit up with new data. "I want to offer you a job," he said, not looking at me. "Not here, not in this." He gestured to the command center. "Draven Maritime. My legitimate shipping company. I need an independent linguistic consultant, someone to vet our overseas contracts, to listen to our partners, to hear what they aren't saying, full contract, transparent benefits, and a security detail, complete safety." It was a lifeline. It was a way out of Fog Row, a way to use my skill for something clean. But it was also a chain, binding me to him. "I'll accept," I said, "on a temporary basis." He finally looked at me, an eyebrow raised. "And with one condition," I added. "Name it." "This war we just started, with Thorn and Balea, we do it with data. We do it with facts. We don't do it because of Leo." His eyes went cold. I had crossed a line. "I won't be your revenge, Cassian, I said, standing my ground. "I won't be the voice you use to justify a killing. We have the paper trail from the painting. We have the drive from the bracelet. We expose them. We don't execute them." He stared at me for a long, heavy moment, the air crackling. I thought he would refuse, that he would tell me to get out. Instead, a slow, grim smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Data, not emotion. You're a brutal negotiator. Nova Lynn." "Boss?" the tech called out, his voice sharp. "I'm in." We crowded around the monitor. The Eclipse key had opened everything. It wasn't just a list. It was a full schedule. The black salt was a down payment, the text said, scrolling. The real shipment, the bulk precursor, is already here. He pointed to an icon on the map I didn't recognize. The Deepwater Base. It's listed as a private research aquarium. It's a front, Cassian said. I've heard rumors. Impossible to get into. It's moving soon, the text said, his voice tight. The transfer is scheduled for the next tidal window, the night of the full moon, 3 days from now. As if on cue, Cassian's encrypted phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a high-priority alert from his legal team. His face darkened. Thorne. What did he do? He's not a mole. He's a spider. He just triggered a silent warrant. The National Strategic Port Service? They've issued a capture or detain order for me. They're claiming I'm the one who sabotaged the dock. He's framing you, I said, my blood running cold. He's using his AIC credentials to paint you as the ringleader. He's trying to get you off the board before the shipment moves. Cassian's first instinct was visible. He was going to fight. He was going to call his men, lock down the port, and meet the NSPS with force. No, I said, putting my hand on his arm. He stopped, looking at my fingers on his sleeve. Don't fight them. Don't become the criminal he says you are. If you fight the NSPS, you lose. You prove him right. He's coming for me, Nova. I don't run. You don't run, I agreed. You cut the legs out from under him. Legally. You have the painting. You have the bank transfer. Give your lawyers the paper trail. Let them expose Balea. Let them show the money moving from the cartel to Thorne. We leak it. We use the law against the lawman. He was vibrating with the need for action, for violence. What I was suggesting was slow. It was uncertain. It was a chess move, not a fist fight. This is a risk, he said, his voice a low growl. It's the only way, Ensue, I insisted. Trust the data. Trust me. He looked at my hand, then at my eyes. The battle inside him was visible. Finally. He gave a sharp, reluctant nod. Fine, he bit out. We play this round by your rules. He turned to his tech. Get the legal team everything. He turned back to me, the predator back in his eyes. But the legal case won't stop the shipment. We still have to stop the transfer at the Deepwater Base. And for that, I need more. More than the drive. I need proof, he said. Irrefutable. I need Balea's voice, on a recording, confirming the shipment, the location, and the product, something we can use to force her hand. I knew what he was asking. She'll never speak to you. No, he said, his gaze intense. But she's lost her key. She's desperate. She'll be looking for a new partner, or a scapegoat. I saw the plan, cold and terrible. You want me to betray her? I want you to be the one person she thinks she can turn, he said. She knows you're the translator. You're the loose end. She'll want to buy your silence or bury you. We'll give her the chance to try. The full moon. 3 days. I was no longer the girl serving steaks. I was the bait. The Deepwater Base was not an aquarium. It was a vault. It was hidden beneath the harbor, a series of pressurized glass tunnels and concrete bunkers that pretended to be a research facility. But the massive tanks, filled with exotic, deep-sea creatures, were just liquid curtains, designed to hide the real business. Tonight, the full moon was so bright it penetrated the water, casting rippling, silver bars of light onto the polished concrete floors. The entire place was silent, pressurized, and cold. It smelled of ozone and salt. I stood in the main observation hall, alone, waiting. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. I was the bait. I had betrayed Cassian. I had contacted Balea through a blind channel, offering a trade the Eclipse key, which I had stolen from Cassian, in exchange for $1 million and safe passage out of the city. She was late. I was wired, a micro-dot recorder taped beneath my collar, the switch a tiny button on my cuff. Cassian was somewhere above me, in the dark, suffocating ventilation shafts, watching through a pinhole camera. A heavy steel door hissed open. Balea entered. She was not in silk. She was in black tactical gear. her blonde hair pulled back, her face pale and sharp. The two Russians from the restaurant flanked her, their hands never far from their weapons. "Little mouse," she said. Her voice echoed in the sterile, watery silence. "You have courage. I'll give you that. Or you are just stupid. Do you have it?" I held up the data chip Cassian's team had faked, a perfect replica of the Eclipse Key's data, but corrupted. "You get this when I get the transfer confirmation." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You don't make the rules here." She nodded to the larger Russian. He grabbed the chip from my hand and strode to a terminal against the far wall. The other one watched me, his hand on his gun. This was it. I clicked the button on my cuff. The recorder was live. "He's angry," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "Draven knows I took it. This has to be fast. I need confirmation of the delivery." Balea watched the Russian at the terminal. "You'll get your money when we verify the key." "And the port transfer," I pushed. "My access is only good for tonight. You have to move the product now." "We are moving," she said, her eyes fixed on the man. "This key," I said, forcing the words out. "It has the new manifests. It bypasses the AIC quarantine. It will clear the entire shipment, the black salt, all of it." Her head snapped toward me. The name, spoken aloud, was a violation. "You will be silent now," she hissed. At the terminal, the Russian growled in frustration. "Eto ne rabotait." "It's not working." "Eto Podelka." "It's a fake." Balea's hand moved inside her jacket. Her eyes, cold and reptilian, locked on mine. She knew. In that instant, a low, heavy thump vibrated through the entire facility. The massive tanks of water shuddered. The ethereal blue lights lining the aquarium glass flickered, died, and came back on, a pulsing, chemical red. A low, guttural alarm began to sound. "What is that?" the Russian yelled. The fish, the giant eels and skeletal, deep-water sharks, began to sense it. The change in pressure, the lack of oxygen. They began to thrash, a sudden, silent, violent panic. A massive grouper, startled from its cave, slammed against the glass in front of me. He cut the oxygen. I breathed. The guards, the secondary team, were panicked. They sprinted past the observation hall, shouting, their boots pounding, running for the life support systems. But Balea and her two Russians didn't move. They were the core team. They knew the real asset was here. Balea grabbed me. She spun me around, my back to her chest, and I felt the ice-cold needle point of a stiletto blade press into my side, just above my hip. "He's here!" she snarled, her hot breath on my ear. "Draven is here, isn't he?" She dragged me back, using me as a human shield. "Where is he?" I didn't scream. I didn't fight her. I lifted my head, my eyes searching the ceiling, and I found it. The dark, domed security camera in the corner. Camera 4. I stared at it, my eyes wide, unblinking. "I am here. This is the spot. Do it." The sound of the explosion was deafening. It wasn't a bomb. It was a precise, tactical breach. The heavy steel door of the vault, 20 yards away, ripped from its hinges and crashed to the floor. Cassian stood in the doorway, a black silhouette against the brightly lit interior of the vault. He was armed, and he had exposed everything. Racks upon racks of chemicals, dozens of aluminum cases stamped with the Eclipse logo, and on the desk, plain as day, was the Mole's logbook, Thorne's private ledger. The Russians opened fire. The world exploded in noise. Bullets screamed off the concrete, the high-pitched ping of ricochets echoing the alarms. Cassian dived for cover behind a steel rack, returning fire. Balea was dragging me, trying to get to the exit, the knife still at my side. I had to move. I stomped my heel down hard onto the arch of her foot. She screamed, her grip loosening for just 1 second. Oh, it was enough. I saw the red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. I lunged. Pulling the pin, I spun, squeezing the handle. A massive, blinding cloud of CO2 fog filled the hall. It was ice cold and choked the air. The gunfire stopped, replaced by confused shouts in Russian. "Nova," Cassian yelled. In the white chaos, I saw Belea's silhouette. I didn't go for the knife. I went for her wrist, the real bracelet, the one I had seen at the auction. I tackled her. We hit the floor, and I grabbed her arm, my fingers digging, searching for the clasp. I ripped it from her, the metal cutting into my hand just as she slashed wildly with the knife. A body slammed into me, throwing me clear. It was Cassian. He landed over me, shielding me, and let out a sharp, guttural grunt. The white fog was settling. The Russians were regrouping. He rolled off me, his hand grabbing his shoulder. "It's a graze," he grunted, his teeth gritted. "We're leaving." He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the main aquarium tunnel. The glass walls were a terrifying mosaic of bullet impacts. The panicked fish thrashed on the other side, a silent, churning vortex of fins and teeth. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the glass tube. As we neared the far hatch, a new sound drowned the alarms. Sirens, loud, close, and coming from above, on the water. We looked back, through the reinforced glass of the ceiling. We could see the harbor, flashing blue and red lights, tactical boats. The main entrance to the deep-water base, topside, burst open, men in black uniforms swarmed down the stairs. NSPS, the National Strategic Port Service. Cashin's legal team had done their job. The evidence from the painting, the bank records, it had all been sent to the clean division of the NSPS. Belea scrambled to her feet, cornered. The chemicals were exposed. Thorne's logbook was open on the desk. The NSPS team swarmed her, guns leveled. She was trapped in the middle of a perfect, undeniable crime scene. She let out a raw, filthy stream of curses, switching between Russian and English as they forced her to her knees and cuffed her hands. Cassian didn't wait to watch. He was already at a maintenance grate in the floor of the tunnel. He pulled it open. Darkness. Nova, I looked back one last time at the chaos, at the flashing lights, at the woman screaming. Then I looked at my own hands. In one, the micro recorder. In the other, the heavy, real silver bracelet. He dropped into the darkness. I followed. We vanished into the utility network, leaving the sirens and the shouting far behind. He had left them a perfect stage, all the actors and all the props. He had played the game exactly as I'd asked, by the rules. We made it back to Pharos by way of the old storm drains. The adrenaline was a poisoned, acidic taste in my mouth. And the moment the heavy steel door of the safe house hissed shut, my legs gave out. A man I'd never seen before was waiting in the main room. He was older, with the quiet, efficient hands of a mortician. He wore medical scrubs. "Doctor, Eris," Cassian said, as if introducing a butler. Cassian pulled off his tactical vest and the shirt beneath it. The graze was not a graze. It was a deep, gouged canyon of raw flesh across the muscle of his shoulder. Slick with blood, he sat on a steel table, indifferent to his own wound, and watched me. I was the one falling apart. Now that the shooting had stopped, the delayed terror flooded in. I sank onto a nearby stool, my entire body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. I saw the flash of the gun, the white CO2 fog, the way Cassian had thrown himself in front of me, the sound he made. I hadn't cried in the tunnel. I hadn't cried when the knife was at my side. I was crying now, silent, hot, angry tears that streamed down my face. My eyes burned, and I knew they were raw, red-rimmed. I was horrified, not by what had happened, but by the fact that he was hurt, and it was my fault. "Doctor." Aris worked with a terrifying, silent precision. He cleaned the wound. Cassian didn't flinch. He threaded a needle. Cassian didn't breathe. He just watched me, his gaze a heavy, unreadable weight. I couldn't stand the sterile silence. I slid off the stool, walked to him, and took his good hand, his left hand, his fingers, calloused and strong, laced through mine. He held on, tight, anchoring me. He never looked away from my face as the doctor stitched his skin back together. When it was done, "Doctor." Eris taped a sterile white gauze pad over the stitches, packed his bag, and left as silently as he had arrived. The room was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of the backup generators. "You're bleeding," I whispered, stating the obvious, my voice hoarse. "I'll live, Nova," he said, his voice rough. "He was aiming for me," I said, the realization hitting me again. In the fog, he knew I had the real bracelet. He was aiming for my back. Cassian stood, pulling me with him. His good arm came around my waist, and he pulled me against his chest, his skin still warm. "And I moved," he said, as if it were the simplest equation in the world. He bent his head and he kissed me. This kiss was nothing like the ones that had come before. It was not the desperate, shocked relief of the storm. It was not the hesitant discovery. This was slow, deep, and possessive. It was a kiss that claimed something. It was a kiss of gratitude for life, a raw, bruising confirmation that we were both still breathing. I tasted the salt from my own tears on his lips. He pulled back, but I couldn't let him go. I pressed my forehead against his, our skin touching, my eyes squeezed shut. "Don't disappear when I turn my back," I whispered, the words fierce, torn from my throat. It was a command and a plea. "Don't you dare die." His hand came up, his palm cupping the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. "I'm not going anywhere," he vowed. His voice was a low growl, a promise that felt more binding than any contract. He held me for a long moment, just breathing. "You're not going back to Fog Row," he said. "It wasn't an offer." "Cassian, I can't." "The lease is terminated. Your things are already being moved." My head snapped back. "You move my things without asking." "There is an apartment," he continued, ignoring my anger, "at the Solstice Towers. It overlooks the bay. The lease is in your name. Draven Maritime's legal division is covering the expense for 12 months as a signing bonus for your new role." He was railroading me, putting me in a gilded cage. "I'm not your property, Cassian. I won't be kept." "It's a security protocol," he said, his eyes intense. "Not a leash. My lead linguistic consultant cannot be vulnerable. You must be safe. The decision is made." I looked at that hard, determined face. He had just taken a bullet for me, and he had played by my rules at the base. Now, it was my turn to set my own. "Fine," I said. He raised an eyebrow, surprised at the quick concession. "I accept the apartment and I accept the job, but I have conditions." A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Of course you do." "I keep my own life," I said, my voice gathering strength. "The job is a contract, not ownership. My decisions are mine. You do not give me orders outside of that contract." "Agreed," he said, the smile widening. "And I keep my own work. I'm going to finish my degree. I'll work for you, but I will also be my own person." "That," he said, his voice soft, "is what I like about you, Nova Lynn." The next few days, the city changed. The news was a firestorm. The NSPS was the hero, announcing the largest chemical bust in Port Harrow's history. The Deepwater base was a federal crime scene. Marcus Thorne's arrest had triggered a full-scale internal investigation at the AIC, and heads were rolling. And in the shadows, the whispers started. Draven, he was involved. He must have tipped them off. Is Cassian Draven clean? He never made a statement. He never denied or confirmed his role. Instead, he made one move. He quietly established the Harbor Hands Fund, a $5 million endowment to provide permanent medical care for all portside longshoremen and their families. It was an answer to his brother's ghost, a promise kept, and the city didn't even know what it was seeing. Pharos changed too. The bank of monitors became my lab. We started building an algorithm, a program fed by the languages I knew and the data from Belea's drive. We were teaching a machine to listen, to recognize the slang for poisons, the code words for precursors, in over 20 languages. We were building a digital net to catch the whispers before they could become a threat. I had one last piece of business. I walked into Marrow and Slate on a Tuesday afternoon. I wore a simple black dress and new shoes without tape. My former manager, Greg, saw me and his face went pale. "Miss Lynn," he stammered, we heard..." I'm here for my final check. Greg, I said. My voice was calm and even. He practically ran to the office to get it. I walked to the server station, where one of the other waitresses, Maria, was polishing glasses. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. I placed a thick white envelope on the counter. "This is for you," I said, "and the other's in the back. Split it." She opened it. Inside was the $3,000 in cash Cassian had given me, my consulting fee from the first night. Her eyes filled with tears. "Nova, I can't." "Yes, you can," I said. "It's a tip." I turned and walked out the front door, leaving Greg standing there, check in hand, his mouth open. That night, I was in the new apartment. It was high up, the entire city spread out below me like a carpet of diamonds. It was clean, minimalist, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. We didn't order in. We cooked. Grilled fish, a salad with lemon, and a bottle of white wine that cost less than $10. We sat on the floor, our backs against the sofa, looking out the glass wall at the bay. "To your rules," he said, raising his glass. "To new contracts," I replied. We clinked glasses. After, we stood by the window. He came up behind me, sliding his arms around my waist, his solid chest against my back, his chin resting on my shoulder. We just watched the container ships, like slow-moving dinosaurs, slide across the black water. His touch was warm, possessive, and infinitely gentle. I leaned my head back against his good shoulder. He kissed my neck, a slow, warm press of his lips that sent a shiver through me. It wasn't hungry, it was just present. His encrypted phone, sitting on the marble counter, vibrated. The sound was harsh, ugly, an intrusion. He let me go, the warmth vanishing. He answered it. Harrow. I watched his face. The soft, quiet man who had been holding me disappeared. The boss was back. "She's talking," he said. He listened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "What kind of deal?" "I see. Find out what he knows. Find out who he is." He hung up, the silence in the room suddenly cold. "That was the legal team," he said. "Balea," I whispered. "She's breaking," he confirmed, his voice flat. "She's terrified. She's offering a full trade, the entire network, all of Thorne's contacts, everything, in exchange for full protective custody." "That's good," I said. "We won. We got her." "We got her," he corrected. He walked to the window, staring down at his port. "But you were right. She was just the broker. She's not afraid of the NSPS. She's afraid of the man she was working for, the man who was behind Thorne, the man who paid for the black salt in the first place." He turned to look at me, his eyes as dark and cold as the harbor water. "She doesn't know his name, but she knows he's still out there, and now he knows we're the ones who burned his entire operation." The Solstice Glass Terminal was a cathedral built for a god of commerce. At midnight, it was empty, a cavern of steel and glass where every footstep echoed on the marble. The massive, domed ceiling trapped the moonlight, bathing the cavernous hall in a sterile, silver glow. Balea Mirov was waiting for us, standing near the center, flanked by two armed professional agents from the National Strategic Port Service, the clean ones. She had made her deal. She looked pale, exhausted, but alive. "She won't name him," I had told Cassian in the car. "She's too scared, but she'll use a classification. Listen for it. If she calls him Batya, the old man, he's generational Russian, old school. If she says Kurator, the handler, he's an official. He's government." We approached. The air was cold, our breath pluming. "You came," Balea said. Her voice was thin, stripped of its arrogance. "You said you had a name," Cassian stated. He was all business, his bad shoulder held stiffly. "He's not a name," she said, her eyes darting to the shadows. "He's an office. The Obsidian Cartel was his smokescreen. Thorne was his puppet, the whole network, the black salt. It was all run by the curator." My blood went cold. A handler. "Who?" I asked, my voice echoing. "Who is the handler?" Balea started, her voice dropping. "He's from the Joint Port Chain Office, a senior director. He controls everything that moves on the east." Clack! The sound was small, metallic, but in the silence of the dome, it was deafening. Clack, clack, thump. The brilliant silver moonlight was gone. The entire terminal plunged into an absolute, suffocating darkness. "They're here!" Balea screamed. A sound like thunder ripped through the air. The heavy armored doors of the terminal loading bay crashed open. Headlights, so bright they were blinding, flooded the hall. Not cars, armored trucks. "Visek ubrat," a voice roared over a loudspeaker. "Take everyone out!" Gunfire erupted, automatic, deafening. The glass walls of the terminal began to spiderweb. The NSPS agents returned fire, shielding Balea, but they were outgunned. Cassian didn't reach for his weapon. He grabbed me by the waist, his grip like iron, and threw us both behind a massive, solid marble information kiosk. Bullets sparked off the stone above our heads. "They're cutting the witnesses," I gasped, my face pressed to the cold floor. "They're killing everyone." "He's here," Cassian growled, his voice tight with rage. "The curator himself. He's cleaning his own house." In the strobing chaos of the muzzle flashes, I saw him. He wasn't shooting. His hand was inside his jacket, pressing a device. Not my panic link, something else. "What are you doing?" "Calling," he said, his teeth gritted. "The real NSPS, the tactical team I've had waiting 2 miles offshore. They're moving." "They won't get here in time." The dirty team was advancing, a wall of black armor, using the strobes of their weapons to find targets. We were pinned. I looked at the dome, analyzing the acoustics. It was a perfect echo chamber. "Cover your ears," I told him. I took a deep breath, filled my lungs, and screamed in Russian. I didn't use my voice. I used the voice of the Arkhangelsk commander. "Otriad Delta," I bellowed, my voice cracking the air like a whip, amplified by the dome. "Oni v zapadnom kryl ogon na podavlenia." Delta Squad, they're in the West Wing, suppressing fire. It worked. The advancing line of dirty agents faltered, confused. They turned, firing wildly into the empty West Wing, expecting a second force. "Now," Cassian said. He pulled a small canister from his belt and threw it. It skittered across the marble floor and exploded in a massive cloud of thick, choking smoke. The gunfire became sporadic, confused. "The control room," he yelled, pulling me up. "We need the projectors." We ran, blind, through the acrid smoke. He knew the layout. He kicked open a door, and we were in the terminal's main control booth. Below, the hall was a churning sea of smoke and sporadic, panicked shouting. "The drive," he ordered. "Thorne's ledger, the file on the JPCO." I slammed the drive into the port. My fingers flew. My training, my language, finding the file. "I have it, and Balea's recorded testimony from the base." "Give it to me." He shoved me aside, his hands taking the console. "This terminal isn't just for trains, it's for presentations." He hit a master switch. Outside, in the main hall, the dirty agents were looking up, confused, as the massive projectors on the ceiling, the ones used to display arrival times, hummed to life. The smoke began to part, and on the curved white ceiling of the dome, 60 feet high, the image appeared, the JPCO director's face. Next to it, scanned pages from Thorne's logbook, bank transfers from the Obsidian cartel. The audio file of Balea naming him as the curator began to play, her voice echoing through the terminal like the voice of God. The dirty agents stopped firing. They looked up, exposed, their handler's face projected over them like a death sentence. "Drop your weapons!" A new voice, a new team. The real NSPS tactical unit flooded the terminal from the main entrance, their weapons trained. I saw him, the curator. He was in the back, in an expensive suit, trying to direct the new, clean team, pretending to be a victim. "Captain," he yelled, "secure the perimeter. The traitors are in that control booth." The NSPS captain didn't even look at us. He walked past the dirty agents, past the chaos, and stopped right in front of the director. "Sir," the captain said, his voice flat, "you're exposed. You need to come with us." "Good," the director said, adjusting his tie. "My car is—" The captain grabbed his arm, spun him, and slammed his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the hall. It was over. Balea was cuffed, too. But as they led her away, she looked at me. She wasn't angry. She was grateful. She would testify. She would live. The smoke cleared, the flashing lights changed from red muzzle flashes to the blue and white of law enforcement, and then the media. A surge of cameras and microphones pushed past the police line. Cassian stood in the shadows of the control room. He could have slipped away, vanished, as he always did. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at me. He had a choice. He turned, opened the door, and walked out of the shadows, right into the center of the flashing cameras. "Mr. Draven," a reporter shouted, "what is your involvement? Were you part of this?" Cassian stopped. He looked directly into the nearest camera, his face hard, honest, and for the first time, completely exposed. "My port was being used to move poison," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "The same poison that killed my brother. I provided the evidence to the National Strategic Port Service to stop it." "Are you cooperating with the federal investigation, Mr. Draven?" "I am," he said. "And as of this morning, I am committing the full resources of Draven Maritime to ending all gray market activity in this harbor, permanently." He was sacrificing his empire, his past. He was choosing. I walked out of the control room. I walked across the marble floor, and I stood next to him, in the full glare of the lights. I took his good hand. The cameras exploded. "And I said, my voice clear and strong, "will be heading the Linguistic Research Division at the Harbor Hands Fund. We will work to identify these threats with transparent data, not with weapons. The age of whispers in Port Harrow is over." The sun was rising as we stood on the deck of Pharos. The storm had passed. The harbor was a sheet of mirrored gold. The city silent. He was in a clean shirt. I was in his sweater. It felt like home. I stepped up to him and placed my hand on his chest. Under my palm, I felt his heart. It was not racing. It was not pounding. It was steady, strong, and even. He looked down at me, his eyes clear, the shadows of the port finally gone. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. He bent his head, and I met him. We kissed. It wasn't the relief of the storm, or the desperation of the auction, or the gratitude of the vault. It was a promise. It was long and warm, and it tasted like the morning. He pulled back, his forehead resting against mine. "From now on, Nova," he whispered, his voice rough. "Any black salt that ever comes near you, I'll turn it into sea salt." Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know where in the world you're tuning in from in the comments. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.